the section in my novel now that deals with the Galapagos is a kind of extended flashback that takes place about, you know, 2/3 of the way into the book, and it's probably the best thing in the book. I mean, I don't like to say that, but from the number of people who have commented on that section and have not commented on other sections, I'm gonna guess that that's the case, and it was certainly a section that was very exciting for me. And the transformation my character ends up having is not a positive one. He has a very catastrophic experience on the Galapagos Islands, but it's one that's deeply informed by everything I learned on this trip, and by this sense of this place as a place that's sort of at the it's like God's workshop. It's like you're seeing God in action. One of the last things I saw as I was leaving the islands, we come up out of the highlands of Santa Cruz, and many of the islands there have completely different ecosystems on opposite sides of the island because of the winds and weather patterns. So there'll be lush on one side, desert on the other. So we come out of this sort of tropical rainforest on one side, and it's desert on the other side, but with trees that are increasingly smaller, but all completely evenly spaced, as if God Himself had gone and planted them in even rows. And you figure out that the reason they're so evenly spaced is because they found exactly the right distance from each other to get just the right amount of water to survive. And it creates this kind of order it's kind of staggering to think about the way in which nature finds its own order and creates this very harmonic kind of balance, even within the context of the brutality of the law of the survival of the fittest. I'm going to stop there. I'd be very happy to take any questions that people might have.
Nino, can
Yes.
I start off with, so we're sort of chatting a little bit upstairs about how you do a lot of research for your books, and you had mentioned that for the part about the Inca Trail that you hadn't been able to go. Do you find that sometimes you get called out on certain details by people?
I'm always afraid I will be, which maybe makes me sort of overconfident. I'm sure I've gotten lots of details wrong, and details also change, or sources get details wrong, and you rely on them. And in the case of the Inca Trail, I spent weeks researching it and doing the trail sort of virtually, and then writing the section about the Inca Trail. And it was a section of about 15-20 pages, and I put a lot of work into it, and in the end I cut 98% of it. Now the Inca Trail appears as a small flashback within the Galapagos section. So yeah, I think I got to the point where I felt I had enough authority to write about it, but it didn't have quite the ring of veracity that I knew the Galapagos section had. The sections that my character goes to in the Galapagos are quite, some of them are quite far afield from where I actually went, but I felt I had enough knowledge of the place to extrapolate to the reality of some of the others, whereas yeah, it sometimes happens that I just feel I haven't quite got that fourth or fifth level of depth that you need to really feel confident about writing what I've read. Yes?
What is the sort of chronological relationship between the idea which you say you never go from, and the story that you have an idea about, and adopting the settings, finding out about the settings, and going there?
Yeah.
And as all of that relates to the writing?
Yeah.
I mean, how does it all, what's the sequence of this?
Yeah. Well, ideally you'd know like 20 years beforehand, and you'd go there and you'd let it seep into you, and then you'd go back and you'd learn new things about it. but you don't always have that luxury. I find that my best ideas gestate for years. I'm working on a novel now that I've only had for 5 or 6 years, and it wasn't long enough. Usually, 10, 12, because I think there's a way in which things percolate. It's hard to know when you then need to step in and do the research and if called for, the journeys to places, and whether you can do it meaningfully, quickly, and at the moment of writing without having that gestation period. I mean, sometimes you have to. With in the case of my first novel, I'd been to Italian villages when I was 12, so I had a deep resource, and I'd been back, at 18 and 21, so I had a deep resource to draw from, and I had my parents' stories and so on. In the case of Testament, I had 3 weeks in Israel, Sinai, Jordan, when I was already started writing the book. I was worried, I didn't know if that was enough, and it's such a complex place. When I went there, there's so much I had to ignore, because I didn't want to know about the 2,000 years of history that had happened after Jesus. But it's in your face. People want you to think about it, and everywhere you go, it's there. So I had to sort of, develop a kind of tunnel vision and really focus in on what I needed to know and the places I needed to see and go. And I felt that I was able to do that. And there was a moment in that trip when I was in the Golan Heights, and there was one character I hadn't quite worked out yet, where I suddenly saw that character's life for me. The story is told in 4 voices. And the last character is sort of an outsider who's a Syrian farmer, essentially. And just wandering the Golan Heights, looking out across the Sea of Galilee, first of all, realizing how small a world that was, and how, Jesus would have been, he's just across the lake there. I'm this farmer from this entirely different planet, really, because the cultures would have been vastly different between, the Jewish world and the sort of Hellenic world of a lot of those Syrian provinces, and yet there it was. So there are, you hope for epiphanies like that when you're out there, that you'll see the right thing that will give you a door in. There was a German writer, I think it was Herder, who talked about like when you're writing historical fiction, or when you're trying to enter historical era, you have to find that doorway where you feel a sense of that different place and that different time at some level. Part of that comes through, research in the library, and part of it comes from being able to see, in the flesh, things that relate to that time. And I felt on that trip that, I passed through that door and had that sense. Yes?
So in order to incorporate the setting and make it a character, are there any tricks you can talk about, or is it just a matter of knowing it well enough to be able to describe it so that the reader can see it? Is it the way the characters feel about it, or how they behave in it?
Well, it's that there's some, I guess, I don't know what the word is, but that, what the characters are doing is somehow expressive of and connected to where they're doing it, and that they're, even in the section I wrote in the Galapagos, there's 3 characters, none of whom are, indigenous to that environment, and yet everything that they do starts to get informed by that environment, and by the kind of Darwinian thinking that place inspires, and the kind of primal battle that takes place in an environment like that. So they become expressive of that. They have, you know, the characters that they bring there, but then they're somehow drawn into the drama of the place that they're in. So I guess it's just a matter of thinking about that and thinking like what is different. How will they be different in that environment than they would be in another environment? And how can I use this environment to create drama that somehow arises directly from the place? If the obstacles that they're confronting at a purely physical level derive from the environment itself, then the environment is going to, you know, take on a presence as a character. So you have to, so once you know the place and you know the kinds of problems it's going to present and opportunities also for you as a writer. That's very
So you allow Alex, the main character, to move from Montreal to Sweden to the Galapagos. So those different environments affect him in very different ways.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, with Montreal, of course, the book is set in the 80s, and so there's this combination of a particular location at a particular time. Montreal in the 80s had a very different feel to it than it does now. So can you talk a little bit about moving the character in those three different environments, and also the combination of the environment at a certain time in history?
Yes. Well, yes. I mean, each environment puts a different stress on the character, and you know, in Montreal, you know, he has a kind of social world that he can conform to that's much different than the world he finds himself and the questions that are asked of him in the Galapagos, where at certain points he's, you know, vying for his very survival. You know, he's stranded, alone, in danger of dying. That's not going to happen in Montreal. It's, you know, it's a direct consequence of, you know, in Montreal, he's confronting the fact that he's not francophone, and you know, there are much different tensions and a much different history. And that when he steps into a certain department store, it's like, you know, stating an allegiance for old Anglophone Montreal, and so he feels dirtied somehow. So it's a much different kinds of conflict. The 80s were, I mean, time period is very important, I think, certainly it is for me. And, you know, for me, that was a moment that was really sort of the beginning of kind of the neoconservative sweep of the world. Already in Canada, Reagan in the US, Thatcher in England. A period that I think we're still really living through, and where a kind of economic model of existence came into prominence that is very social Darwinist. So it tied in very directly with the thematics of the novel, and in fact, it's a mode of economic thinking closely tied to Darwinism at his time. I mean, Darwin was, in his day, a liberal, and what we call the liberal in the 1800s is what we would call a neoconservative now. So Darwin really ushered in many ways, not directly himself, but in the kind of zeitgeist that he gave birth to. The political world that Alex finds himself in the 1980s, and one of the some of the characters he deals with are Salvadoran refugees, and he comes to understand that even the plight of the Salvadoran peasant in 1980 is directly related to the kind of land reforms of the 1870s that came in as a result of Darwinian evolutionary theory and the scientific thinking behind it. So, you know, once you become aware of those kinds of connections, then it, you know, gives you a lot of room for for understanding the whole ecosystem, as I say, the characters are operating.
What is Alex's evolution from the beginning to the end? What happens
Yeah.
to Alex? What is the story?
Well, he starts out still traumatized by an event in the Galapagos, which you don't want to give away, and troubled by his relationships. He also has discovered recently that he has a son, a 5-year-old son in Sweden that he didn't know about, and he befriends early on in the story a woman suffering from multiple sclerosis. So. It's this relationship with the woman with multiple sclerosis who gets, whose condition worsens as the novel progresses to the point where she's bedridden and close to death. That really is both the main sort of the overarching storyline and the agent of change for him. It's through his relationship with him that he, starts to get over some of his traumas to grow really as an adult, or to grow into adulthood, to learn how to care for another human being and therefore be able to accept his parenthood of this boy in Sweden. His initial reaction to learning as a father is terror, and he ends the novel sort of setting off to not necessarily to marry the woman or even to live permanently in Sweden with his child, but to go there and try and form some kind of. So that's his evolution over the course of the novel. I guess the other thing that's going on is that when he's on the Galapagos Island, he's with this character, this failed academic who is a bit of a nut and quite unlikable, and who's a committed sort of Darwinian, and Alex, resists that worldview, and yet as time goes on, he finds it infecting his own view of the world more and more. That kind of, I guess, cynical view that everything is done in self-interest, and every exchange has some kind of power element to it, and some kind of animalistic territorial instinct informing it.
It's survival of the fittest.
Yeah, essentially. So he's trying to reconcile that worldview with an idea of goodness. He's trying to strive to be good and find some definition of goodness he can live with. So I think by the end he does reach some kind of synthesis that he can live with. I mean, the book doesn't set out to answer questions. It sort of sets out to pose them, but I think he gets to a point where, I think his central insight is that he can be pretty certain that everything he believes in that moment will be proved to have been superstition, within 100 years. So he doesn't have to answer all these questions. He can just move forward and do the things that he has to do.
I think we have time for one more question. Somebody's got one more.
Yes.
How important is it for you to get the location right? In other words, if one of the streets that you name in one of the books or alleyways is not exactly geographically correct,
Yeah.
is that important to you?
Well, I'm less concerned with that kind of accuracy than I am with creating a place that is useful for the fiction. So if I can't use a real place because it's too unwieldy in that way, and then I will, I'll create one. But in the case of, for instance, Montreal in that novel, I looked for things that I could use that were real and accurate, and I didn't feel obliged to describe all the things that I didn't need to use. But I don't like to twist the real world if I can avoid doing so unless I'm trying to make a point in doing that. You know, the novel I'm working on now is sort of about placelessness in a way. So I'm doing more of that there. Like the places are more ambiguous, the characters are less rooted. They spend more of their lives, you know, in a kind of virtual world of cyberspace. I'm kind of exploring what that means. So there it sort of makes sense to almost to use a kind of vagueness about the place, and I don't name places specifically, but I'm doing that for a point. Otherwise, I try to be as true as I can to reality. Thank you so much for coming out. It's been really